You are standing in a powder keg, and the fuse is already lit. You just don't know it yet. It's the spring of 1775. You are in the center of a wide, sandy avenue stretching exactly 1 mile long. To your left, a grand brick college. To your right, an imposing Capitol building. Behind you, the humid, dense pine forests of the Virginia Tidewater. And all around you, the political and cultural heart of the wealthiest colony in British North America. This is Williamsburg. It is a bustling, elegant town of about 2,000 people. You see stately red brick homes, white wooden fences, and a towering church steeple piercing the clear sky. But look closer, and you will see the brutal paradox of this place. Men in powdered wigs are arguing fiercely in the streets for their undeniable liberty, while enslaved Black Virginians drive their carriages and haul their water. The royal governor of this colony is Lord Dunmore, a Scottish peer who rules from a lavish palace and trusts absolutely no one. He knows the people are turning against him. He is paranoid, isolated, and desperate. In a matter of hours, under the cover of darkness, British Marines will quietly slip into this town to empty its central gunpowder magazine. The citizens will riot. The drums will beat. By the time the sun rises tomorrow, the spark of the American Revolution will catch fire right here in these streets. But right now, the sun is coming up. Welcome to 24 Hours in Williamsburg. Listen. That is the bell of Bruton Parish Church, ringing out across the morning air. Beneath your feet, the main road is paved with crushed white oyster shells that crunch with every step. This is the Duke of Gloucester Street, a wide thoroughfare that will one day be called the most historic avenue in America. But today, it is simply the artery of an empire. Notice the sharp, almost jarring contrast around you. Wealthy plantation owners, the masters of the Virginia economy, are arriving in town wearing fine imported English wool and silk. They step out of polished carriages directly into roads shared with wandering livestock, stray pigs, and the muddy ruts of a working agricultural society. How do you run the most powerful colony in the Americas from a town that is mostly quiet for 10 months out of the year? You do it during public times. Twice a year, the population of Williamsburg doubles, triples, explodes. Planters bring their families, their horses, their money, and their politics. They come for the courts, the markets, and the theater. But this spring is different. The air is thick with tension. The talk is not of tobacco prices, but of boycotts, militias, and defiance. Now, look toward the center of town. Sitting alone in the middle of a grassy square is an imposing, octagonal brick building with a pointed roof. The Powder Magazine. It holds the colony's arms and ammunition. Normally, it is a quiet, overlooked structure. But today, if you watch closely, you will notice something is deeply wrong. The usual guard is unusually alert. The governor's men have been seen watching it from a distance. The magazine is fully loaded. But who does that gunpowder truly belong to? It is mid-morning now, and the sun is beginning to bake the sandy streets. Look away from the wealthy burgesses and their finery for a moment. Look at the people who actually run this town. Over half the population of Williamsburg is enslaved. They are the ones hauling the water from the wells, cutting the timber, tending the horses, and preparing the meals that the royal governor and the wealthy planters will eat today. They are the engine of this city, working in the shadow of men who are actively debating the natural rights of man. You might assume these enslaved men and women are isolated, but you would be wrong. Right under the noses of their enslavers, a vast, secret network is operating. Black Virginians use the constant flow of goods and people during public times to carry messages, trade stolen or forged goods, and share news from other colonies. They speak in coded language. They know exactly which white merchants will look the other way for a cheap price on a chicken or a bundle of firewood. Down the street, you pass a modest wooden building. This is the Williamsburg Braille School. Inside, a white teacher is instructing enslaved black children. It is a complicated, brutal paradox. The official curriculum is designed to teach these children that their enslavement is ordained by God, that obedience to their earthly masters is their religious duty. It is a tool of control. But the children are secretly acquiring something far more powerful: literacy. They are learning to read and write. They are taking a system meant to suppress them and turning it into a tool for their own empowerment and eventual liberation. This is the true, hidden pulse of the city. A complex world of survival, resistance, and quiet defiance. If you were dropped into the streets of 1775, do you think you would have noticed the secret networks running the city? Let me know in the comments, because the royal governor certainly doesn't see them, but he is about to face a completely different threat. High noon. The Virginia heat is rising, and the town is fully awake. You walk past the governor's palace, an imposing, symmetrical brick mansion surrounded by formal gardens. Above the main entrance, the royal coat of arms gleams in the sun. This is the domain of Lord Dunmore. You step inside the central hall and immediately feel the threat. The ceiling and walls are entirely covered in a geometric display of hundreds of British muskets, pistols, and swords. It is a stunning visual reminder to every colonist who enters. The king's power is absolute, and it is armed. But the man holding that power is currently terrified. Lord Dunmore knows the political winds are shifting. He is isolated in this opulent palace, surrounded by colonists he no longer trusts. In the privacy of his study, he is hastily drafting a secret dispatch to the captain of a British warship anchored miles away in the York River. What is he planning? We will find out tonight. You leave the quiet tension of the palace and walk toward the hustle of the trades. The air is thick with the smell of wood smoke, sweat, and hot iron. You hear the deafening, rhythmic clang, clang, clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Sparks fly as he shapes a glowing horseshoe on the anvil. Next door, a cooper is rapidly assembling wooden barrels. These barrels are essential. They will hold Virginia's true currency, tobacco. But talk to the merchants and you hear panic. Williamsburg is a consumer society, utterly dependent on imported British goods, from the glass in their windows to the tea in their cups. But now, the colonies have agreed to boycott British imports to protest the new taxes. The ships have stopped coming. If a war breaks out, the people here are suddenly realizing they might not be able to clothe themselves or repair their own plows. The dependency that built this wealth may now be their greatest weakness. It is late afternoon, and the shadows are beginning to lengthen along the Duke of Gloucester Street. You walk toward the eastern end of the avenue, leaving the shops and tradesmen behind. Rising before you is a massive H-shaped brick structure. This is the Capitol. It is the seat of the General Assembly, the oldest legislative body in the New World, and the political heart of Virginia. Step through the heavy wooden doors. The air inside is stifling. It is crowded, loud, and echoing with the sounds of boots on wooden floorboards. Men in heavy woolen coats and powdered wigs are sweating in the Virginia heat. But it is not just the weather that has the temperature boiling. The laws is breaking down. Listen to the voices bouncing off the plaster walls. Debate, objection, defiance. Men who have known each other their entire lives, men who have traded together and dined together, are suddenly eyeing each other as enemies, loyalists against patriots. The royal government is losing its grip on its most prized colony. Patrick Henry is not in the room today, but his ghost is. Just weeks ago, in a crowded church in Richmond, Henry delivered a speech that set the entire colony on fire. "Give me liberty, or give me death." You hear those words whispered in the corners. You hear them muttered in the hallways. The realization hits you like a physical weight. This is no longer just a protest over taxes. This is treason. To defy the king, to openly talk of armed resistance, is to invite the hangman's noose. You can feel the sharp edge of fear underneath the righteous anger. Men are quietly discussing the formation of independent militias. They are talking about gathering weapons, which brings everyone's mind back to the hundreds of pounds of gunpowder sitting unguarded in the center of town. The sun begins to dip below the tree line. The formal legislative session adjourns, but the real work of the government is just beginning. As the delegates file out of the Capitol, they are not going home. They are heading straight to the taverns. Dusk. The sun has set below the tree line, leaving the dirt streets bathed in shadow. The formal legislative session at the Capitol has adjourned, but the real work of government is just beginning. As the wealthy burgesses file out of the building, they do not go home. They head straight to the taverns. Williamsburg has a drinking culture that mirrors the rowdy ports of New Amsterdam or Philadelphia. The taverns are where the actual politics happen, and none is more important than the Raleigh Tavern. Step inside. The light is dim, lit only by candles and a crackling fire. The air is thick with the sweet smell of pipe tobacco, roasted meats, and rum punch. You hear the clinking of pewter tankards and the low, urgent murmur of voices. It feels less like a pub and more like a mafia backroom. Sitting around these tables are men like Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and Peyton Randolph. They are drinking heavily, yes, but they are also organizing a shadow government. They are circumventing the royal governor, passing resolutions to embargo British trade, and solidifying their defiance. But they must speak carefully. There is a very real threat of British spies listening from the next table, or a loyalist neighbor reporting their words directly to Lord Dunmore. One wrong sentence in this tavern tonight could mean the gallows tomorrow. Evening falls over Williamsburg. The transition is sharp. Without the noise of the blacksmith's hammer or the clatter of carriage wheels, the town settles into a deceptive quiet. The wealthy burgesses and royal officials withdraw into their parlors and dining rooms. Through the glowing, multi-paned windows of the finer homes, you can see the glimmer of silver and crystal. They are dining on Virginia ham, peanut soup, and roasted oysters, washing it all down with glasses of imported Madeira wine. The air inside these rooms is warm and privileged, filled with polite conversation that dances carefully around the edge of revolution. But step away from the glowing windows and walk into the darkened side streets. Out here, a very different kind of evening is unfolding. The enslaved men and women who labored all day in the hot sun are finally claiming the only time that belongs to them. In the shadows behind the kitchens and stables, out of sight of their enslavers, they gather. They trade goods they have grown or scavenged. They share news overheard at the tavern tables and in the dining rooms. They know exactly what the white men are planning. They understand that a war for liberty is coming, and they are quietly calculating what that might mean for their own freedom. Down the dirt path, you hear a rhythmic, heavy footstep. The night watch is beginning its patrol. A watchman walks by, swinging a lantern that casts long, eerie shadows against the white fences. He calls out the hour, his voice echoing in the damp spring air. His primary job is not just to keep the peace, but to watch for fire. In a town built largely of wood, fire is the greatest, most terrifying threat imaginable. But what do you do when the fire is political? What happens when the people themselves are the spark? The town is pitch black now, except for a few flickering lanterns. A profound silence settles over Williamsburg, but it is the wrong kind of silence. It is the heavy, breathless quiet that comes just before a storm. Something is coming. It is 3 o'clock in the morning. A heavy, damp fog has rolled in from the tidewater, swallowing the streets of Williamsburg. The taverns have finally gone quiet. The watchmen are at the far ends of their patrols. The town is asleep. But down by the York River something is moving. Remember the secret dispatch Lord Dunmore was writing at hay noon? This is the result. Under the cover of total darkness, a detachment of British Royal Marines has slipped ashore from an armed schooner. They are moving with a practiced, terrifying silence. They march the few miles inland, their heavy boots making barely a whisper on the sandy, rain-dampened earth. Their destination is the exact center of town, the octagonal brick building sitting quietly in the grassy square. The powder magazine. Inside that building sits the colony's supply of gunpowder, the very lifeblood of any potential militia rebellion. Without powder, those muskets leaning in the corners of colonists' homes are nothing more than expensive walking sticks. Dunmore knows that if he takes the powder, he castrates the Virginia resistance before it can even be born. The Marines reach the magazine. You watch from the shadows as the heavy wooden doors are carefully, slowly unlocked. You can hear the faint, agonizing creak of iron hinges cutting through the dense fog. Next comes the heavy lifting. The Marines hoist the wooden kegs of gunpowder, hauling them out into the night and loading them into the back of a waiting wagon. 15 half-barrels in total. The air smells sharply of sulfur, sweat, and damp earth. They are pulling off a midnight heist that will alter the course of an empire. They almost get away with it. But Williamsburg is a town that currently runs on paranoia and light sleepers. The scrape of wood against wood, the muffled snort of a draft horse, a shadow moving incorrectly in the heavy mist. Someone hears them. A town resident, wide awake, spots the wagon pulling away from the magazine. The realization of what is happening hits him like a physical blow. The royal government is actively disarming its own citizens in the dead of night. The silence of the night is suddenly, violently shattered. The heavy brass bell of Bruton Parish Church begins to ring frantically, a harsh, terrifying alarm that rips people from their beds. The warning drums begin to beat, a rapid rhythmic call to arms echoing down the Duke of Gloucester Street. The streets erupt. Doors fly open. Men who were arguing in the Raleigh Tavern just hours ago pour out of their homes. They aren't wearing their powdered wigs or fine broadcloth coats now. They are in their nightshirts, they are barefoot in the mud, and they are holding loaded muskets. You are standing in the middle of absolute chaos. Hundreds of enraged, terrified citizens are swarming toward the magazine, their faces illuminated by the harsh orange glow of hastily lit torches. They realize they are too late. The powder is gone, heading toward the river. The fury is palpable, vibrating in the air. The armed crowd surges toward the governor's palace, demanding blood. They are threatening to burn the opulent mansion to the ground and drag Lord Dunmore out by his collar. The fuse hasn't just been lit. The powder keg has officially exploded. The dawn light hits the governor's palace, a red brick symbol of royal power, entirely surrounded by hostile territory. Lord Dunmore has officially fled. He, along with his family and a few loyal servants, slipped out of the palace before sunrise. He has taken refuge on the HMS Fouille, a British warship anchored safely out of reach in the York River. He will never return to Williamsburg. The city wakes to a profoundly changed reality. The royal capital is effectively dead. The people in the streets are no longer British subjects protesting attacks. They are Virginians without a recognized government. The news spreads rapidly down the Duke of Gloucester Street. The governor has abandoned his post. The powder is gone, and Patrick Henry, riding a wave of popular fury, is marching a newly formed militia of Hanover County volunteers directly toward Williamsburg to demand compensation for the stolen gunpowder. You stand in front of the empty powder magazine. The heavy wooden doors are wide open, swinging slightly in the morning breeze. Inside, the space where 15 half-barrels of gunpowder sat just yesterday is completely empty. The silence in the town square is different this morning. It is not the quiet of a sleeping town. It is the tense, expectant silence of a people who have crossed a line from which they can never return. The story of Williamsburg does not end with a single morning of outrage. Instead, it ripples outward, changing the course of human history in ways no one on these sandy streets could have predicted. While the stolen gunpowder ignited the immediate fury, it is what happens next that truly cements this city's place in history. You watch as Patrick Henry's Hanover militia stops just short of the city limits. Rather than plunging Williamsburg into a bloody urban battle, a tense negotiation takes place. Lord Dunmore, terrified and isolated on his warship, is forced to pay £330 sterling for the stolen powder. It is a humiliating concession for a royal governor and a massive psychological victory for the patriots. But Dunmore is not finished. From the safety of the water, he begins to wage a war of attrition against his own colony. He issues a proclamation offering freedom to any enslaved person who abandons their patriot enslavers and joins the British forces. Hundreds of Black Virginians, many of whom you saw navigating the shadows of Williamsburg just nights before, seize this dangerous but profound opportunity for liberty. They form the Ethiopian Regiment, wearing uniforms embroidered with the words "Liberty to Slaves." It is another striking paradox. The British Crown, deeply entrenched in the slave trade, momentarily becomes the greatest vehicle for emancipation in Virginia, all to crush a colonial rebellion fought in the name of universal rights. The final blow to royal authority comes a few months later at the Battle of Great Bridge. Here, Virginia forces decisively defeat Dunmore's troops, forcing him to completely abandon the colony. Virginia is now truly independent, and Williamsburg is its capital. Fast forward 1 year, to May of 1776. You are back outside the H-shaped Capitol building. The men inside are no longer a royal house of burgesses. They are the 5th Virginia Convention. The debates are no longer about taxes or boycotts. They are about creating a new nation. On May 15th, they pass a historic resolution instructing their delegates in Philadelphia to propose a declaration of independence from Great Britain. A month later, they adopt the Virginia Declaration of Rights, a document drafted by George Mason that will directly inspire the United States Bill of Rights. This town, built as a monument to royal power, has entirely dismantled it. By 1780, the capital will be moved to Richmond, a safer location further inland. Williamsburg will quietly step out of the political spotlight, slowly fading into a sleepy college town. Its buildings will weather and age, some burning, others rotting. It will wait over a century before being resurrected, painstakingly restored to the bustling, complicated, and contradictory city you have explored today. But for now, the drums of war are still echoing down the Duke of Gloucester Street. The revolution has begun, and you are standing at its absolute center.